Okay, I think we're going to get started. We're almost getting close back into schedule. We'll see how it goes. We're going to have an exciting panel on AbTeC Futurisms. And our chair is friend and colleague, Dr. Stephen Borys.
Thank you, Julie. This session is called AbTeC Futurisms. And Futurism was actually an artistic movement in Italy 100 years ago. It was all about speed, technology, youth, and violence, and objects like cars and airplanes, industrial cities. And of course, it spread from Italy to Russia, England, Belgium, and other places. Sculpture, art, painting, fashion, literature, music, film, theater, industrial design was all there. So looking at AbTeC Futurisms with really what is an impressive international panel of artists, curators, academics, writers, architects, activists. Coming a century after the other futurists, I think this panel can share a lot about art, speed, youth, technology, design, industry, when it comes to what is going on right now in the Arctic regions. So I'd like to introduce the panel, and I'll go from your left to right. Dr. Heather Igloliorte is the Assistant Professor of Aboriginal Art History at Concordia University in Montreal. She holds a university research chair in Indigenous art history and community engagement, and her teaching and research interests center on Inuit and other Native North American visual and material culture, circumpolar art studies, the global exhibition of Indigenous arts and culture, issues of colonialization and self-determination. Oh, so funny, Julie. Some of her recent publications include chapters and essays in Negotiations in a Vacant Lot, studying the visual in Canada, Manifestations, New Native Art Criticism, and Inuit Modern. And she has been an independent curator for close to 12 years, organized the nationally touring exhibition, Asinnajaq, which of course is coming to the WAG in the spring. And most recently, Dr. Igloliorte was appointed the guest curator for the inaugural exhibitions for the WAG's Inuit Art Center. Next we have Asinnajaq. She's a filmmaker, artist whose work is fueled by respect for human rights, a desire to explore her Inuit heritage, and a sense of wonder at what she calls the abundant beauty of the world. The daughter of filmmaker Jobi Weetaluktuk and the university professor Cale Rowan, she was a teenager when she assisted her father on the set of Tamuti in 2012. She later studied cinema at NSCAD University in Halifax. Her film, 3000, created in 2017 with the National Film Board, embeds historic footage of Inuit selected from the NFB's archive into a 14-minute original animation. And of course, the work is in Insurgence and Resurgence. Next we have Siku Allooloo. She's an Inuit Haitian Taino writer, activist, community builder from Dechinta, Northwest Territories. She has a BA in Anthropology and Indigenous Studies from UVic and a diverse background in Indigenous land-based education, youth work, solidarity building, community-based research. Most recently, she has been a program coordinator and facilitator, co-instructor at Dechinta, the Center for Research and Learning, working with elders, educators to deliver land-based skills and build strength in community. Her advocacy work through writing and speaking centers on issues of climate change environmental protection, ending gender violence, and decolonial politics. As an emerging creative nonfiction writer and poet, her work has been featured in the New Quarterly, Briarpatch, Guardian, among others. Finally, we have Joar Nango, who is an architect with a degree from NTNU in Norway. He's a practicing artist. He works with place-specific installations and self-made publications which explore the boundary between architecture, design, and visual art. Thematically speaking, his work relates to the questions of Indigenous identity, often through investigating the oppositions and contradictions in contemporary architecture. Recently, he has worked on the theme of the modern Sami space through a self-published series. He's also a founding member of the architecture collective, FFB, which works with temporary installations in public space. Currently, he lives and works in Tromsø, Norway, and his work has been exhibited internationally, most recently in Documenta 14, Kassel, and Athens. So I get to go first. Thank you, Julie, for inviting me. I just want to talk about a project. So I've been director here for about 9 years, and I came back to Winnipeg, the city where I was born, to try to build this Inuit Center. And if you'd asked me 5 years ago what that center looked like, it would probably be very different. And there's one reason we're building it. That's one of the many reasons. We have the largest collection of contemporary Inuit art in the world, close to 14,000 objects. It's a very interesting space to build next to. And there you have, I'm just going to walk you through what is kind of the design for this project. You have the wagon. You see on the left those two buildings which have now been demolished. That's the site for the new Inuit Center. We had an international competition. 64 architects from 14 countries submitted or participated in what was an ideas competition. The winner was Michael Maltson out of Los Angeles, working locally with Sibanal architects. Michael Maltson actually produced two schematic designs, one before we went to the Arctic and one after. And the first one was a very competent design. But what happened after that trip to the Arctic, and we went to Rankin, to Igloliorte, to Pangerton, to Cape Dorset, traveling with our curatorial team and members of the architectural team, and at each point meeting artists, elders, community leaders. That's a shot close to Pang, with Michael, his family, Darlene, curator, Ewan Bond, the photographer in the red vest, and George Sibanal on the left. So the design, of course, responds to a number of things. It began with Michael's exposure to the physical collection. It then expanded to the land, the geography, and these are some of Ewan Bond's photographs of the space. If there was ever an architectural photographer that I've met that understands buildings and can bring a building to life, it's Ewan Bond, the Dutch photographer. So Ian traveled with us. We couldn't afford his fees, but he waived them for us if we could get him up to Igloliorte. And the documentation followed the land, and then it went to the people and the communities and back to the art. So Michael actually came full circle. And I think it was at that moment on that trip, just when Michael understood that he had to go back to the drawing board, which he did. So he returns to LA and begins, there he is with Wietaluktuk and Pang and her daughter. So of course, the form by no means is defined by the forms he saw up there, but inspired, responding to. And he continued to work on these plans, looking at landforms, coastlines, materials, minerals, forms, and of course the art. comes back and begins working on the design for this center. And for Michael, it's very much a modular or a constructive process where, while he works with sketches and drawings, he works largely with the model. And of course, you see it's a very unique spot on the property to try to build, to connect to Gusta Rosa's 1971 limestone-clad building. Michael's team went through a number of machinations, a number of processes to get to what was the ideal form for this building, because at all stages, the form has been critical to his thinking from a programmatic, architectural, and aesthetic perspective. And of course, this is what you're seeing today in terms of the final design as we move forward with construction drawings. This is about a 40,000 square foot building on 4 levels, connected by glass bridges to the existing WAG building. It will house not just the Inuit, the physical collection of 14,000 objects, but it will provide research space, study space, exhibition space, and art-making space. And there you're seeing it from the front, from the facade of the WAG, with the center on the left rising up. The biggest change in the design over the last 2 years was Michael literally lifted up the form of the Inuit Arts Center to expose to a height of 21 feet the entire main floor of it. And of course, inside that atrium, or that main hall, will be the carvings vault. So a 3-story vault that extends 2 stories up and 1 story down, which will allow us not just to exhibit the entire carvings collection, but also expose the workings from a conservation, research, curatorial point of view within the vault. It, in a way, is the foundation of this entire center. It will be the collection itself. And of course, with its kind of amoeba-like form, you'll be able to get around and move within, while still we're able to maintain what is a secure vault. Right next to the vault will be a space for lectures, talks, presentations, film, performances that will connect to the out of doors, but that same space will allow us to collect a classroom in Winnipeg, to a classroom in Rankin, to a studio in Pang, through a number of projects working with Cisco and other ways to connect these kids. Research, talked to Julie about that in terms of what kind of research agenda will be at the Inuit Arts Center. But you know, it started with providing spaces to exhibit the collection. And what Michael wanted to do was, rather than just give us a gallery that we would work on and modify, he wanted to give us a space that over the years could change, could expand, could contract, but to ensure that there was sufficient square footage. And this shot just outside of Igloliorte perhaps is the most inspiring image for Michael in terms of trying to capture something of that, the limitless quality of that horizon, or the way the sky hits the water and there's nothing. And so the biggest gallery in the Inuit Center is close to 8,000 square feet. The ceiling rises up about 30 feet. So when you're in Eckhart Hall adjacent in this space, that's about a 21-foot ceiling. To give you an idea, it's a huge space. At first the curators hated us, hated me, hated the architects, but it was a chance for us to rethink how we've looked at, exhibited Inuit art, and a chance, and this of course is just one rendering of how that space will look. There are other galleries within the, say, smaller galleries where we can exhibit collections, light-sensitive works, thematic shows. The penthouse, which connects to the top level of the Inuit Center, also expands our host studio program. So there'll be 7 new studios, not just for painting, printmaking, mixed media, but also for carving. This project has been going on for years, you might say, but the design has been realized in the last couple years. You know, I teach this course called The Idea of the Museum at U of W, and students come here once a week. The exciting thing about that is they've challenged me at every front to rethink what is the museum today and what is the role of a collection in the city and a community. You could say there was an architectural program put in place for the design of this center. I remember looking at this drawing by Luke Angohadluk, a drum dance, a Baker Lake artist, and it, for me, summed up the hierarchy or the strat plan or even the organizational chart of how we could make this thing happen in terms of getting engagement, support, endorsement from all communities, which we didn't have when we started, but I'm really happy to say we do today, and I think that's the only way this center can be built. You know, we have architectural teams, consultants, designers, engineers, but what I found over the development of this project, who is leading the project, are the people that are closest to the objects, their production, and the people that have perhaps the greatest stake. And these are the ones that have guided me and my team, informed us, challenged us, made us rethink what we use, how we use space, the materials, the programs, and what's important. And over, the questions come, but the support is always there. And these are the people, the associations, the circles that have really made this project happen, and that will actually allow it to be truly a response and a reflection of what is going to be the strongest and the boldest voice, which will be the Inuit voice. That was the last meeting of the Indigenous Advisory Circle this past summer. And of course, the curators and the artists behind the exhibition upstairs. My favorite shot of the year, well, from last year, was Jamie's Border X show. That changed the WAG forever. I just want to leave you with one image. It's Luke Igloliorte's Bird Shaman from 1974, Baker Lake artist. And when I went to the Getty Center as part of their museum leadership program, it's a 3-week intense study with 30 museum directors from around the world. You had to go there with one challenge and one image. And my challenge was, what is an Inuit center today? The image I took was this one, which for me still remains the most inspiring, hopeful work in our collection that helps me understand where we're going, how architectural space can actually transform a museum. It is a museum in terms of a building, but for me, and I think for my board and my staff, it's become a dialogue, an opportunity, a forum to truly engage and rethink perhaps how we've presented Inuit art up until now. Thank you.
I just want to start by saying I'm very grateful to the Initiative for Indigenous Futures, especially, of course, Jason and Skalmanati, and then Julie, Jamie, the WAG, and of course all the funders for having us here. I'm really humbled to participate among such an amazing roster of brilliant artists and curators and academics, and I have learned so much. My brain is like, today, I'd like to introduce some of my curatorial research and practice focused on the arts, and think about some new forward-looking directions that I hope to take my work in the future. I don't exclusively curate Inuit art, but it is the thing that really lights me up. And when I say Inuit art, I mean that in the broadest sense of the word. P.C. Pitsiolek Stevens has noted that for Inuit, quote, art is a part of everything. And I hope to convey some of the depth and breadth of Inuit art through this brief visual introduction, and then I hope we can expand it in our conversation later. I'd like to begin these presentations with a map depicting our Inuit homelands in the circumpolar world so that you get a sense of where we are from. So all the areas in region in yellow around the circumpolar world are the homelands of the Inuit. In Canada, from west to east, that's the Inuvialuit region, Nunavut, Nunavik, and Nunatsiavut. And I am from Nunatsiavut, and I have provided a phonetic pronunciation of the word. takes me a moment, because today is actually Nunatsiavut Day. It is, and for the Inuit who may be live streaming this at home, this is our 12th birthday. It's the 12th anniversary of our becoming a self-governing people, and I'm hoping that on the count of 3, you will all say happy birthday Nunatsiavut with me. So 1, 2, 3, happy birthday Nunatsiavut! Thank you. Nakumi. I want to start by talking about my doctoral research. Oh, how do I go back? Yeah, let's talk about Labrador. I wrote my dissertation on Nunatsiavut art. So although I've been a curator for 12 years, I did my first show in my master's degree in 2005. I'm going to start with a more recent project and then show you some other things that have happened since then that have been really significant to me. This one in particular as an exhibition that was informed by Inuit ethics, values, and knowledge, community-engaged research, and reciprocity. My doctoral research began with a simple question. Why haven't the artists of my region of Inuit Nunanjat, that's the 4 regions together, been given the same kind of attention or support as artists from other Inuit regions? Because the literature on Labrador Inuit art was scant in 2006 when I started this research, especially compared to the considerable scholarly and curatorial work produced over the last nearly 7 decades from the mid-century onward. Inuit art has achieved a remarkable critical and curatorial success. Consider, for example, that despite the fact that there are only about 70,000 Inuit in Canada today, a recent federal government study concluded that in 2015 alone, Inuit art, including the performing arts and secondary markets, contributed $87.5 million to the national economy and provided the equivalent of 2,700 full-time jobs to Inuit. This also includes a large number of Inuit who make art but are outside of the market, who produce art and craft but do not consider themselves to be in the market base. So you can think about how impactful that would be for all of our communities. Inuit are the highest producing per capita in every region across Canada. Within Inuit art history, there exists a complementarily vast and significant literature on Inuit art, including hundreds of exhibition catalogs and scholarly texts, edited volumes, journal articles, and numerous publications in the popular media. And I must note here, a considerable percentage of that has been produced right here at the WAG since the 1950s through to today. And I know we've all been to see Insurgents Resurgence, but if you didn't stop on the second floor, there is a really great show of Inuit graphic comics called In Between Days that I encourage you to go and see. And on the other side of that, you can actually see some of the maquettes for the new building that Stephen was showing in his photographs. I won't go into, okay, so there's this vast literature on Inuit art, exhibition histories, and so on. And yet, in 2006, when I started my doctoral research, 2007, there were no books and only a handful of articles or essays on Labrador Inuit art, and I didn't know why. I won't go into all the reasons for what this was, but what I discovered in my doctoral research was that Labrador Inuit were originally left out of Inuit art history for reasons that had nothing to do with the arts at all. In 1949, the same time that the modern Inuit art movement was beginning in what is today known as Nunavut and Nunavik, Newfoundland and Labrador that same year joined Confederation, but the new province and the federal government could not reach an agreement about who would provide services to the Indigenous peoples in the province, and so they simply took it out. They took out all mentions of Aboriginal peoples in the terms of Confederation. This meant that all the First Nations people in Newfoundland and Labrador were left out of the Indian Act, and all the Inuit were not covered under the Department of Mines and Resources, which has later turned into other things, but basically there were no federal considerations for Inuit people in my territory. And this has had long-lasting and disastrous results for all of our peoples, but in this context, it's important to note that it also meant that we were not included in any of the developments that happened throughout the Arctic, funded by the federal government, that occurred within the first decades and then led to what is today a multi-million-dollar industry, a really significant international art market, and a really important art history to Canada. So I wrote my dissertation, and I would say often it was kind of depressing because it was a history of how people worked really hard and then didn't get anywhere because there was no funding for any of the initiatives that, people would start up grassroots organizations and then they would fold after a couple of years. So after I completed my doctorate and was hired at Concordia University, I was given an opportunity to be a co-investigator on a Shirk Partnership grant called Mobilizing Inuit Cultural Heritage, helmed by my colleague, Dr. Anna Hudson at York University. Anna asked me what I wanted to do with this opportunity, And I responded that I wanted to go home, visit all of our communities, discuss the state of the arts with the artists who were living it, and ask them what challenges, discuss with them what the challenges and opportunities were that they saw, and then collaboratively decide what we should collectively do about it. So what I did find in consultations, we went, over the course of this whole project, we went home and did about 25 community visits in 7 communities. At the top, you can see that we're doing consultations. That's in the government offices in Nain. Some of the things that came out of the discussions, and I will note that former research assistant Camille Usher is here tonight, and she was on the project from her undergrad through her master's and is now doing a PhD. She's standing in the middle of the bottom picture there, and she's sitting right there in the audience. And Camille came on as an undergrad, and I kind of threw her in. I was like, we're going to the north. So we traveled multiple times and did consultations, and we asked people what's happening here and how could things be better. And artists said, we have a lack of resources. We don't have art supply stores here, so we have to use materials that are readily available. There's a very high cost of materials that we do get shipped in. Sometimes they're of very poor quality because it costs so much to ship it up the coast that the suppliers know we're not going to ship it back for a refund. And then they also said that we don't get a chance to do really ambitious work because we are so involved in the day-to-day art market that we have to keep producing and making and producing and making in order to support our livelihoods. So we said to them, if materials, money, and time were not an obstacle, if you could make something to the best of your abilities and to the height of your imagination, what would you make? And artists got really excited about this, as you can imagine. And then we did a process where we invited them to write down for us exactly what materials they would need in order to do this thing. And we spent over $40,000 on materials for artists, bought sealskins in bulk. We bought, I don't know, like 65 sealskins, materials from all over, and brought it all to Labrador, shipped it up, and gave it back to the artists, gave them an entire year to work on their projects, and then did an oral history process at the same time. This is Elder Gilbert Hay on the right side of the screen, carver Derek Pottle, and animator and artist Echo Hinook, Gilbert's granddaughter here. You can see that we traveled throughout Labrador doing oral histories at the same time. You can see these all on our website. And then we held, at the website at the bottom of the screen, we held a community exhibition that was up for 4 days to coincide with we put it up in 4 days, it was nuts. We had 187 works of art submitted by over 100 artists. Everyone who submitted had work accepted to the show. We put it up in, as you can see, we had to borrow the pipe and drape from the local high school. And we put this up in the Kinsman and Kinnett Center, which is like a darts club, and covered the room in pipe and drape. The person who was running the Kinsman Center built temporary walls for us, and we held a show. Any artist that wanted to sell their work could. We did $12,000 in sales in a 4-day period in a town of 4,000 people. As you can see, we had sculpture, prints, photography, drawings, clothing, basketry, everything was included in that show. And then from that community show, we selected about 25 pieces that then went on and joined works that we borrowed from collections across Canada, primarily the rooms, Asinnajaq, Michelle's now collection, it was formerly under Linda Grassani, and from other collections across Canada. And we did an exhibition which is now touring across the country. So it will be here, as you can see, at the WAG on May 25th. It'll open and be here all summer and into the fall. And then it will be at the Mackenzie for its final stop in 2019. So we're very, very happy about this. I'll just go through very quickly and show you some of the works from the show, because I know I don't have a whole lot of time. The exhibition is organized not chronologically, but around generations. So elders, the trailblazers, fire keepers, and the next generation. Because of course we had elders working today that were in the show and elders working 30 years ago that were in the show. And so to be comprehensive, we organized it generationally. That's the clicker. Works included dolls, painting, drawing. This is Heather Campbell's piece that she just showed. Digital photography, which is becoming quite huge across the Arctic right now. Works that are, this is an early 90s piece in experimental photography. This is a young man who was only 18 years old at the time. This work by Chris Sampson that is in the collections of Asinnajaq. And then we produced a catalog, which is the full text of each catalog is produced in English, French, and Inuktitut. I've totally lost my point of the slides. So following this, I'll show you very quickly another project that I've recently done. So this was an example of a really community-engaged project. We bring artists to every opening. We do workshops. They have professional development opportunities. We've done a lot of capacity building, and I'm very happy to talk your ear off about it after this, but I have to keep moving. Another exhibition that I've recently curated is the permanent exhibition Ilipunga, I have learned, at the Brousseau Inuit Art Collection at the Musée National des Beaux-Arts in Quebec. It opened in June of 2016. This was a collections-based show that I did. The collection was largely sculpture, and so to work with this amazing collection of sculptural works that they have in the Brousseau collection, what we did is that we brought in, I keep speaking with the royal we, I brought in a group of 8 Inuit in order to contextualize and make sense of the works in situ. This is an image of Kuzi Curley, a sculptor, but we also had seamstresses discussing the beautiful Inuit clothing that was depicted in the sculpture. We had elders talking about hunting. We had filmmakers talking about motherhood. We had everything kind of brought together in order to give a more holistic sense of Inuit culture, because the concern was that someone would walk into a sculptural show and not really absorb the real depth and richness of what was portrayed in the works. And so we provided this multimedia intervention in order to showcase a number of Inuit from across the country to be able to hear the language, hear songs, and understand the works. Again, more recently, this is Inuit Blanche, the night festival that I co-curated with my colleagues Britt Gulp and Mark Turner. This was a festival, again, talking about wanting to bring in every kind of Inuit art form. This was held in context with the Inuit Studies Conference last year, and we had drum dancing. This is Red Berry. This was delicious. We had an exhibition called Community Freezer, which paired Chef Justin Igloliorte, it's my little brother, and with photographs by Barry Pottle from his Foodland Security series. We had live printmaking with a group of artists that had come together from across the Arctic to do a printmaking exchange all that previous week, and then they did like potato printmaking with children. Sculpture, there's Kuzi again, and Billy Gauthier from the Natsiavat in the background. We had a live sculpture demonstration, live drawing. Fashion installations, we took over some shopfront windows and this is Hinani Designs. There's also Victoria's Arctic Fashion in the other window. We had a live seal skin demonstration by this Arnate collective that took over a space in St. John's where you can actually buy sealskins products. That's where I got these fabulous boots. There was outdoor installation. There was a Inuit Nunanjat throat singing exchange that was funded through Canada Council's Aboriginal Peoples Collaborative Exchange Grant. I think they've stopped that program. But this was really incredible because we brought throat singers together from all over the country who, for the first time, got to, like all the songs are the same, but they are different across the vast Arctic. And so they got together and exchanged the songs like The Mosquito and Boiling Water and Dog Team. And then they did a 6-person performance standing in a circle at the end of the evening, which was amazing. You can find it on CBC. Installation, this is AbTeC by Cousine Van Hoevelen. Neon Kakanit by Marjorie Tabone, who's an Alaskan artist who came in and was doing live tattooing demonstrations, and then for the public decided that she would do paint for people coming through that installation that night. We had performance. I love this one together because I'm like, Allooloo is not a giant, but I just think it's so, it's so funny to see them together like this because like Vinny's so little and Allooloo's so big. So they're both performers from Kagiavut, and together with Norma Dunning, they did performances. There was also a lot of video screening, which we didn't get good photography of, but Joar Nango screened Nomads Won't Stand Still for Their Portraits. That's almost the title. There were other video works that were shown throughout the evening as well. Heather Campbell, who was here, did a live painting demonstration at a park. There was all kinds of things happening. We had people could try seal and all kinds of other foods. And then we ended the night with a musical performance. This is Twin Flames. So that was Inuit Blanche. I'm going super fast. How am I doing on time? I have a couple minutes. Okay, and then most recently, I contributed an essay to an exhibition catalog for an exhibition called Earthlings, and to me, it points to another kind of new, interesting direction in the idea of collaborative curatorial work that I think is a new direction for some Inuit work, and I'm very excited about it. In Earthlings, the artists collaborated in both north-south and north-north production. Earthlings brings together the works of 7 artists, 1 southerner and 6 northerners, that employed juxtaposition, experimentation, and free association to produce challenging and intriguing works of art. The exhibition presents works in ceramic and graphic media, and produced both individually as well as collaboratively. As you can see, these are 2 of the Inuit men that worked together on a project, but there were also collaborations between North and South, which took place both at Matchbox Gallery in Rankin Inlet, as well as at a residency at Madalta in Medicine Hat, and then also works that were produced solo by all of these artists, 67 pieces altogether. The idea for this project came from the artist Shari Boyle, who is a Toronto-based artist and the architect of this project. Her artistic sensibilities bear a striking resemblance to her first collaborator from the north, graphic artist Shuvani Ashuna of Cape Dorset. Ashuna and Boyle first exhibited together in 2009 when curator Nancy Campbell astutely paired the 2 in Noise Ghost at the University of Toronto Art Gallery. 2 years later, when Boyle was a guest artist at Kinite Studios, Ashuna and Boyle created their first collaborative drawing, which Ashuna titled Universal Cobra Pussy. This collaboration became a nucleus for other collaborations between the South and North with artists and Earthlings, who also collaborated towards the individual and co-production of the 67 works in the show. The majority of the works are ceramic, and produced either at Matchbox and Madalta. And it's important here to note, I think, that these kind of collaborations and why we don't see more of them is because of the very great expense of Arctic travel primarily. Inuit don't take advantage of residencies and those kind of travel opportunities as much as others because it's extremely expensive to travel to the north. I just wrote a grant and we were costing prices, and I think the lowest one was about $2,100, and that's from Ottawa to Igloliorte. And with the more expensive ones going up to like $3,600, $4,000. We can come and visit you in New Zealand or Australia for cheaper than that. And it's, a 3-hour flight or a 6-hour flight away. Because of this great expense, these kind of opportunities for exchange have not happened as much as we would like in the past. Many galleries have done a really excellent job of bringing artists in for their openings, but in order to get artists together for exchanges, I think there's a lot of exciting potential that is still there. And what these experiences have taught me is that there is a critical richness that emerges from and through the relationships that we build with each other. There is so much potential in our interactions when made available, and so many exciting possibilities for the future, which we have begun to build upon with each other and with all of you as we have opportunities such as this. And so on that note, and the last thing I wanted to introduce this afternoon is that, as Stephen said this morning, I'm very honored to be invited to guest curate the inaugural exhibitions of the Inuit Art Center, which will open in 2020 here. This new exhibition will respect our past, articulate our present, but most significantly be focused on Arctic futurity through the contemporary art practices of the artists in the show. And furthermore, building on my desire to work collaboratively and to support Inuit artists and emerging curators to continue to break new ground in Inuit art, it seems entirely relevant to me that at a conference hosted at the Initiative for Indigenous Futures, called the Future Imaginary, that we would take this opportunity to make the first official announcement that for the first time in the history of Inuit art, I will not be guest curating this contemporary art project alone. Rather, I am thrilled to announce here to you and to everyone watching the live stream that as my first initiative as guest curator, I have invited 3 additional emerging Inuit curators to be the guest curatorial team of the Inuit Art Center. Together, we represent every region of the Canadian Arctic, from west to east. Jade Nasagalawak Carpenter, who is here somewhere in the room right now. Jade, where are you? Wave at me. Woo, there she is. Asinnajaq. Krista Zawadsky, who was here this morning and I think has probably also already had to fly away, and myself. I want to thank the WAG for their tremendous support of this project. We hope you're all going to come back in 2020 and to experience the new National Inuit Arts Center. And Asinnajaq will be taking over the WAG's Instagram this evening, so if you don't already follow the WAG, you should. You're going to see our very first collective photo together, and you can expect a press release early next week, but you heard it here first. Nakumi.
Hi. So I'm Asinnajaq, but you might know me as Isabella Weetaluktuk. But you can call me Asinnajaq. I'm the daughter of Joby Weetaluktuk and Carol Rowan, and the majority of my family lives in Igloliorte in Nunavik. So that's, I like to call their home, even though I'm based in Montreal. If you want to see my work, if you haven't already seen it, it is in the installation upstairs, and it's a film called 3000. That film explores the archives, it explores history, and as well goes into the future. So I won't talk too much more about it now, but I'm always happy to talk about it with all of you personally. What I learned while making this film and doing research and lots of stuff, talking to people and reading oral accounts and just doing the things I do, is that my ancestors provided shelter and nourishment for their families and the networks and communities around them, guided by values that we call now the IQ values, which included, not treading too hard upon the ground and taking what you need, and lots of intricate systems of maintaining relationships. And that was how people lived, and that was a lifestyle that was developed over thousands of years. A lifestyle based upon values like respect and so on. So this way of life, of course, was shaken by colonialism and by the shifting of beliefs from shamanism to Christianity and some other religions, depending on where you're from, and intentionally shaken through the colonial process, not accidentally. When I was making my film, I reflected upon my relationship to the past and the future, and the way that I've come to think about it is like that I have two hands outstretched, one to the past and one to the future, and I'm always connected to those people, always. When I think about that, it reminds me that the past, the present, and the future are built by people that are like us, that have motivations and needs, and that's what reminds me that they're people, makes me know that we're not powerless when it comes to the future and what arrives in the future. Because it will be built by people like us. And what we can do for those people is to make ourselves the best that we can be, because we're relationships with the children and the people around us, and the more that we try to be our best, the more that the people around us can be their best. And that goes on and on and on. And I know a lot of us can observe a difference in the next generations. We saw really young hoop dancers last night, and so many people that are proud to be from where they're from, so many more numbers than previously in the past couple of years. And so I think what we can do for the future is to try and remember the values that we would like to see in the future, and pass them on, and give our trust, if we can be our best and help everyone be our best, give our trust to the future ancestors, that they'll make the right decisions to manifest a world that's positive and based on these values like for me, the IQ values, the respect and for the land and the people that we're living with. There is one really concrete thing that I would hope for the future that has to do with Sasum Akna, which is the woman down there, which is the woman that controls all of the animals. And many of you have probably heard the story, and she has no fingers because they've been cut off and become all of the animals in the ocean. And she can't maintain her hair, her look, so it flows wildly. And if it gets too tangled and wild, then she'll withhold the animals because it's a value to take care of yourself, and she can't do it for herself. So one thing that I hope for in the future and is that there'll always be a person there to go and help her maintain her hair. Thank you.
I'm very, very grateful to be here, and I would like to, first of all, express my respect to all of the people of this territory, past, present, and future. I would also like to say a very big thank you to Skawanati and Jason, and to Julie and Jamie. I'm here on behalf of Dechinta Bush University, which is located in the Northwest Territories in Denendeh. They're an organization that has really been pivotal in my own reclamation of being. It's an organization that does land-based education with elders and youth in Dene territory, and we combine northern academics with survival skills and Dene wisdom, and it takes place on the land where these things can happen and work simultaneously through intellectualism, embodied practice, spiritual awakening, and emotional intelligence. So it's a really wonderful program. What I'd like to talk to you about today is kind of a mixed bag of things, because myself, I'm made of 3 different tributaries of people in homelands. So my Inuit family, my father's family is from Mi'kmaq, from Pundinlet, Nunavut. We're Inuit. On my mother's side, we're Haitian and Taino. We relate back to the Taino, or the Indigenous people of Haiti and large part of the Caribbean. I also belong to a Dene Suthlene family from Treaty 8 territory in Denendeh, southern Denendeh. And so I embody a lot of complexity, and I try my best to integrate a lot of, as much as I can, the ancestral wisdom that I've inherited and been able to have access to. So I would like to talk about the transformative power of access to ancestors and descendants and land in the present, through land connectedness and through a spiritual connectedness. I'd like to first share an excerpt of a story with you that I wrote. It's called Tuktu Glow. Tuktu means caribou. It was Christmas break in Yellowknife, and we were celebrating. We were 3 Inuit women of 3 generations. My cousin, whose family had been relocated from our home community of Pundinlet by the RCMP, She was one of the last to attend a residential school. Her friend, like my father, was one of the last to be born and raised on the land. And myself, the first to be raised outside of Nunavut and to have not been raised in a residential school. Like others, our lives were each threaded with an array of colonial trauma, though that evening, this was furthest from our minds. For this brief, unexpected moment, we transcended everything. My cousin had lovingly roasted a large, beautiful piece of caribou just for us, so we sat around it with great joy. We cut pieces off with a knife and brought it to our mouths with our fingers. Tuktu was getting harder to come by, and this was my first in a long time. It might be helpful to know that in my lifetime, I've seen the decline of the Bathurst caribou herd go from nearly 400,000 to 13,000 in the span of about 25 years. So I chewed, and the meat felt insatiable in my teeth. They clenched and grinded each bite with pleasure as the flavor I was raised on dilated my every cell and brought my whole being forward into intoxicating focus. In a breath of sudden self-consciousness, I looked up at the other two women and saw that they were already in deep, their eyes downturned and far away as they savored each mouthful. Without hesitating, I took another large bite. The pull carried us to an innate world. Some were primal, dark, endless, like a full moon in winter, eternity blowing in the wind across the blackness of the night, an ancient existence, a womb. When we came back into the room, 45 minutes had passed. Not a word had been spoken. The meat was all gone. We looked at each other. Holy... my cousin finally said, and we all broke into laughter. "Look at us, 3 Inuit women eating tuktu," she said. "What our people have eaten, for thousands of years. It's so deep in our DNA that it just took us back." We sat there, still glowing. "They were so incredibly tough," she said, "to survive out there on their own, in the freezing cold, with only animal skins and snow houses, traveling in the dark, no sun for months, giving birth, hunting for days, sometimes coming back with nothing. And she was raised like that," my cousin said, pointing to her friend beside me. "When all the children were being taken away, her grandmother packed her in a kamutuk and took her out into the cold. She built them an igloo, and they lived there together for as long as they could, until eventually they had to go back. Isn't that amazing?" That's the end of Tuktuklo. Thank you. So I've come to think about portals. If we're talking about travel through time and space and imagining our future, I think about that in inherently low-tech terms. I think about that in terms of our sense of connection. How do we know ourselves? How do we know who we are and come from? What are the things that connect us? Our own forms of intelligence. And I think about these things now because of colonial imposition and how much has become barriers to our access to those points of knowing and being and belonging, and really has interrupted our sense of continuity. So I think about all of the points of access as portals, and so ancestral foods like tuktu can be a portal. Practices of tattooing, language, art, music. We have so much richness that when we really make the space and connect with them from our own understandings, then they become transcendent. So this is what we try to foster at Dechinta Land-Based University. I know that this is inherently part of the practices of many of the brilliant speakers that have spoken to date as part of this this really inspiring conference. I wanted to share something else. I've been so inspired personally by Maori resurgence. Last year, I took a trip to Aotearoa because it was my own part of my own future imagining. As somebody that works with elders and youth, I'm always thinking about how can we rebuild our own societies, how can we repair our relationships. So much, we've suffered so much damage and disconnection between our generations as a direct result of residential schools. And I was really inspired. I met a friend from Tauranga, Te Kahu Rolleston, and he's under 30 years old and speaks his language fluently and knows his creation stories, knows his protocols and oratory. And I thought, how do you have all of this intact? And he had said to me that 30 years ago, the Maori language was almost wiped out, and the elders got together and worked together with political leaders, traditional leaders, parents, teachers, and they built kohanga, language nest schools and cultural schools, and raised a new generation of kids within their culture and language. So I wanted to go there to experience a people, an Indigenous people that were not interrupted by residential school, and so their generations, their ways of relating with each other across generations and also different sectors of society, they're intact. And they're full of so much good spirit and mutual supportiveness. And so I was profoundly inspired, and I got to spend 4 months learning from different Maori youth leadership programs. One of them, the very first one I went to, was up in the far north. It was hosted at Motuti Marae, and one of the leaders of that program, her name was Mina Pomare Pieta. And this morning, when the panelist, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name at this moment, you're talking about Mana Wahine Maori, and I thought, I've experienced this because I met this woman and I saw how she ran this program. And what they did was such a practical embodiment of what I would want our future to be like. At this youth leadership program, they were connecting Maori youth to lands that had just been newly reclaimed in a treaty settlement that the people around today had never had access to in their lifetime. And so as they're surveying their reclaimed territory, they're bringing these teenagers out to the territory, and they're teenagers who have been raised with language and culture, know their oratory. The teenagers were the ones who were doing the protocols. So they were given a lot of responsibility. And then what I found so amazing is that the leadership of this program were talking to the youth and saying, as you go out into this territory, we need you to be looking with your young eyes at the territory and the issues that our tribal leadership are facing as we go forward. Is we need to think about sustainability and access to clean water. We need to think about how to deal with invasive species, climate change. We need you to be looking at this landscape, and we need your ideas for how can we move forward? What are some solutions? What are ideas that you have? So we think about knowledge. A lot of the time we think about sacred sources of knowledge as only in older generations, but really it's everywhere, and children are sacred, and young people are sacred, and so is the land, and so is the water, so are women. So I just thought it was quite amazing, and that's something that I would like to be able to bring back home and be able to foster further. Just a couple more things. Do I have a few minutes still? Okay. So another thing that happened in New Zealand is there was an elder there who is an expert in genealogy and whakapapa, and he was able to go back, and he had said there was an Inuit whaler that back several generations married in and became part of that group. And so he had said, there's a connection here for you and your people, and you're welcome here. And so thinking about portals and futures, I experience an understanding as an Inuk and somebody who is connected through Dene spirituality and Dene land, and a Taino descendant, as an understanding of the world as profoundly interconnected. And the connections are endless, and they're also there. We don't have to scratch the surface too far, even between our communities, to find the basis of a lot of relationships. So maybe I'd like to leave with one more idea of time as cyclical and different realms of reality. We haven't really spoken too much about the spirit world, but I believe and experience the spirit world as a dimension simultaneous to this dimension, and we have access to that through things such as names that we've been given. I think about seeds, the ways that our ancestors had to plant and bury seeds within us in all these little ways, and we find them and we wake up, and we really desperately need to wake up and to remember who we are and come from, so that we can also see the present reality clearly and not be overwhelmed. I know that we're on the verge of a great catastrophe in climate change, and it's something that is difficult to wrap our minds around, but it's something that we need to be able to address and be prepared for. I know in the North there have been a lot of prophecies from several generations back talking about the end of capitalism, and when water is going to become the most important, valuable commodity. I don't know if I should call it a commodity, but the most precious thing on earth, and how different people are going to need to be able to work together and live together. And so my vision for a future is necessarily a very pragmatic vision. It's like profoundly beautiful and spiritual, but it's also very pragmatic. And so my hope is that in looking back to all the things that we've experienced and the things that have disconnected and displaced us and alienated us from ourselves, that in healing in the present, we're also healing both past and future, and to be able to access all of that wisdom so that we can find solutions to connect us further into our homelands and into our sense of community with one another, and that hopefully that can be some of a dynamic in which Inuit people, Dene people, can finally be related to on a basis of mutual autonomy and self-determination to be who we are.
How does this work? To where do I point it? Hey, I'm Joar. I'm Sami from Tromsø, which is on the Norwegian side of the Sami area in Northern Europe. I have today decided, since it's about futurism, decided to present some of my more collective works, because I think the future is collective. It's the idea about collectivity involved in talking about the future. Well, I forgot to thank the organizers of this fantastic and inspiring event. So thank you for inviting me. I'm at the moment actually in Banff, so it was kind of convenient for me to come here. I'm leading a residency there as faculty for a residency program called Inherent Design, which I do together with Ursula Johnson, who some of you, or probably many of you, know already. I have written a manuscript, so it's not the coolest presentation I've ever done, but since it's we are short on time, it helps me to be more precise. Okay. How can architectural interventions within the public realm facilitate for critical thinking around Indigenous identities? For this presentation, I will present a few projects I've done through the architectural collective FFB. It's an architectural think tank I founded in 2010 with my good friends and colleagues Eystein Tallarås and Håvard Arnhof. FFB translates to the collective project for a denser concentration of the city. Our intention is to be an independent platform for self-education and creative research on the field of architecture. Our projects are experimental, research-based, and always not for profit. Many of our projects have been exploring the boundaries between private property and the idea of the commons on the other hand. When we established FFB, our main intention was to create a professional platform for working with space and architecture that could be investigative and creative and detached from today's architectural logic, one that is largely driven by developers and slow-moving capital machineries, capitalism. Our design methodology is largely influenced by the Sami and nomadic ways of organizing space, which is a topic I've done a lot of research on and which my sort of individual art practice is founded upon, this research. One which is temporary and lightweight, following the spatial logic of the camp. The focus on creative and resourceful material use is a natural part of this. We're inspired by the creative attitude in building that one can find in the vernacular and self-built environments of the North. Here, self-reliance is the ideal. As architects, it has been important for us to develop a certain design methodology that appreciate the creative approach towards using limited resources and the distinct I-can-fix-it attitude in solutions and constructions. Makeshift structures are shaped by where they are made, where it will be placed, and who the user is. In our point of view, this way of relating to site, context, and purpose grounds a spatial production. The outcome of each project is usually an event in which the built temporary space acts as a framework for hosting people in an open and inviting setting. We have, in a playful way, been referring to a kind of participation, which you will see in some of the images I will show. This social component is important, and the discussions and meetings generated through the placemaking and the spaces we make are considered the most important architectural outcome. In our architectural practice, we never work towards an idea of something being finished. Rather, we search for enlightenment and cross-cultural meeting points in which the architecture itself suggests and insists on enhanced cultural and material diversity within our increasingly generic public domain. The architecture FFB creates is therefore an architecture celebrating the failure of capitalism. These are some of the structures that we have built that I will not present. We have been particularly engaged in the ongoing series of collaborative architectural design works or installations in public space that we call spaces for disagreements. These are temporary, more or less makeshift structures in public space where we, through collaborations, create platforms for marginal groups to express themselves within the public domain. It has been important for us that questions concerning marginalized people reach a broader and more global audience. It's equally important that members of the communities themselves are given the opportunity to be seen and heard on their own premises. The most extensive project we have done so far, we've been active for 7 years, is perhaps, or most likely, or definitely, the Roma Embassy, in which we designed and built a cultural house for the Roma population in Norway. The project took a little more than 2 years in preparation. During the course of 2 weeks, FFB, the architects, designed and built a temporary cultural house for the Roma population of Norway in a central public square in Oslo. The material used was some old horse carriages and the leftover material from a large architectural exhibition, which we demounted together with youngsters from the Roma community. After finishing the small building, we hosted a cultural event program with historical seminars, language courses, film screenings, food tastings, and more. The project intended to manifest the potential of and underline the expressed need for the Roma cultural people to have a cultural house in Oslo, a cause they have been working to get for years. The reason for the government gave for not giving the Roma community such a space was grounded in the conflicts that existed internally between the Roma families. So there was patriarchal heads that were fighting each other in some kind of a long ongoing war. By involving the different families in the group to collaborate on different parts of the building process and design process and organizing different parts of the event program, we managed to avoid any confrontation, and the conflicts never appeared. In my opinion, this shows the potential of architecture as a unified language that sometimes can provide an inclusive platform for creating new kinds of togetherness. In this case, our weird little makeshift shack proved to be more flexible and less confrontational than any of the spaces and institutional meeting rooms the government had been using to solve the problem. Also, for me personally, as an Indigenous and Sami artist, this project became interesting in the way that I was removing myself from my position as a definition maker in terms of identity. By taking a step out from being the Indigenous subject, I found myself in the position of being an outsider and a representative of the majority. It was interesting for me to challenge my role as both an architect and as a Sami. I realized how used I am to belong within a certain kind of ethnic group, and how this informs my creativity. Thinking further upon what is considered wanted or unwanted in our European urban landscape, we did a project we called the Ditch Garden, or also known as the Sanctuary Garden for Invasive Exotics. This was a small garden for different versions of the plant called Japanese knotweed, an invasive exotic species that in Norway is blacklisted as a plant, meaning they are actively tried to be removed from the Norwegian flora. We found it particularly interesting to compare the language used in the blacklist publication released by the government in 2012 with the language used by the Norwegian populistic right-wing party when it concerned their fare towards immigrants. The term invasive exotics all of a sudden got a new and complex flavor to it. The project resulted in an installation for a gallery called RAM in Oslo. We basically transported a 6-meter long and 1-meter wide piece of a ditch filled with Japanese knotweed and replanted it at an inaccessible rooftop area outside the gallery. The rooftop was made accessible with a small staircase that we built into the gallery director's office desk. A hole in the gallery wall made the garden visible from the gallery as a spatial kind of painting. At the opening, we served edible items made from the plant, while the Sami flute player Øystein Hansen, from a village close to where I live in Tromsø, played a flute concert on instruments he had made from the dried stems of the plants in front of the garden. Aleppo Strikes Back was a collaborative piece we did with a group of paperless Kurdish Syrian refugees in Norway. This was happening at the beginning of what we in Europe call the refugee crisis, which was triggered by the Syrian war 3 years ago now. For a week-long period, we drove along the coast of Norway, visiting different reception centers for asylum seekers, asking refugees to come along for a scenic trip along the coast of Norway to my hometown, Tromsø, in the north. The invitation came with a promise of bringing them back within the week was over and all food and accommodation would be covered. The trip culminated with a hafla, another word for street party in Arabic, that took place in Tromsø as a side event to the electronic music festival called Insomnia Festival. The hafla served as a way to bring people together to produce new connections and friendships. The space we created for the hafla became an environment for production in the gallery based on the refugee skills and education. We made a wood carving bench, a video editing suite, a sewing studio, a hairdresser saloon, and of course a Kurdish pizza kitchen. For the end party, we flew in the Parisian DJ duo Acid Arab, which played a live set mixing all kind of Eastern music from North Africa, Lebanon, Egypt, Turkey, with electronic beats and sounds. Needless to say, this became the party of the year in Tromsø. Drawing from my interest in nomadic architecture, as I said, that's where my sort of individual practice is founded in that research. And also the Sami way of moving in the landscape. FFB did a project we call Mækjetrosja, or Matatu, in Karasjok. Karasjok is one of the 2 major Sami cities in northern Norway, where also the Sami parliament is located. The project has 2 interconnected parts, a mobile one-night event and a sculptural transformation of the roof sign at the closed-down Shell gas station. During the course of 2 weeks, we demounted the plexiglass cover from the Shell logo on the 30-meter-long lightbox. We then deconstructed the material into small, simple, movable furnitures used for different things, including a party. Out of some old Euro pallets found in the back of the gas station, we made a new sign for the gas station roofs. In Northern Sami language, on the roof of the old gas station, it now reads, "Ei chuov umeridovun luottaid, ei gevissis njulkotuosaid," which means, They don't follow routes and they don't conform to regulated order. The station, with its new public image, was used as a hub for an old Toyota Hiace, which we pimped up as a taxi. Much inspired by the informal taxi systems of the Matatus in East Africa, we named our taxi Mätjetrosha, which means wilderness taxi in English. The taxi was trafficking the distance between two Sami sister villages, Karasjok and Kargasniemi, which lays on each side of the Finnish-Norwegian border. At the opening night, we hosted a dinner party and a barbecue arranged on the stairs in front of the Sami Art Center, before we drove the audience over the Finnish border, where we arranged a party with DJ, dance floors, and an improvised bar on a parking lot. Most of this club was constructed out of the furniture we had built from the yellow and red shell sign pieces. After midnight, we moved the party to the workshop hall of the gas station, where we made an improvised rave party out of remains of the shell sign and other found objects. The party ended outside the gas station in the center of Karasjok. The last, most dedicated members of the party all seated around a fireplace, in which we, in a very ceremonial way, burned the rest of the materials used during the party. Continuing the creative and spatial exploration of nomadic traditions and the lack of Sami visibility in our Scandinavian public space, we did another project called Searching for Smooth Space. The project was done in a Sami city, in the Swedish side of Sápmi called Ume. For those of you that were at the dinner yesterday, that's the name of the river that Elina, my other Sami artist colleague that's here, was yoiking. The project was a 2-week-long exploration of the philosophical term smooth space versus striated space, and the thinking around that related to Deleuze and Guattari's nomadology. These texts are found in 1,000 Plateaus, probably the most referenced publication in European art academies. Parallel to arranging a series of site-specific reading groups in random public settings, we also built the main construction for a Sami turf hut. Which is also known as a Darfegoti in Sami, in the town of the city. The piece of land we built on was outside a squat, a piece of land occupied by a group of local youths wanting to establish a self-governed cultural house. The structure was built entirely out of found material harvested in the various public parks and non-spaces we were doing reading sessions in. Towards the end of the process, when the structure started to develop, we hosted dinners and events in the structure itself. The space also contained a traditional Sami fireplace, which allowed us to gather people and cook. The process was documented and shown in photo, text, and a video installation at the local gallery called Bildmuseet in Umeå. It was also accompanied by a series of poems written and developed by one of the young anarchists from the squat, which was called Erik Persson. Through the work with FFB, it has become apparent for me that we need more flexibility and elasticity in our public spaces. From a designer and builder's point of view, I see a big potential in embracing concepts of spontaneity and improvisation, ones that are very prominent in most indigenous cultures, in favor of planning and control. In order to create room for indigeneity in public space, we need an architecture with a closer and more sensitive relation to the production of space. We need collective sanctuaries where Saminess and other indigenous definitions may be explored as part of the subjective and dynamic processes in an identity under constant construction. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists. We have used all of our time, and I know Julie's session's coming up, but I just wanted to sum up a couple things and maybe turn one question over. It's amazing why we didn't discuss what we were going to present or dialogue. There's a wonderful theme and continuity, starting with Heather talking about community engaged projects and a holistic sense of how we approach a culture. And then moving to that image of two hands outstretched, looking back to the past and looking forward, and using it in terms of maintaining relationships. And then going to points of access as portals to a sense of knowing and knowledge being everywhere. And the ability of that to heal both what is from the past and what is in the future. And then the idea of the future is collective, and a sense of, I love the last point, of flexibility and elasticity within a space. And I think of that applied to the museum, and then the museum becoming a sanctuary for what we've discussed. Really brilliant, powerful thoughts here. I'm happy to turn over just for a couple minutes if someone might pick up on something that really has connected us all this afternoon. Come on, Heather. Yes, Heather. That's you, Heather.
Do you want to say something? Siku? I don't know. I think that you kind of you hit on it. You know that it's really remarkable that we would all, or maybe it's not remarkable at all, that we all believe in the same way towards the future is to be collaborative. You know, the circumpolar world is, as I was saying, very, very spread out, but we are all connected. You know, our stories are the same all the way around. Our resources, our animals that we care for, the spirits that we share, it is collective. And so I think that it's not that it's a new way of doing things. It's an approach that is actually quite old, but that it has always been futurist. Yeah.
I think we could leave it at that. That was a fabulous way to end the panel. And thank you all for participating.